Well, this is the juicy part of the fall forecast when we asked Dr. Doug Gillham to talk about fall and the transition into the colder air, and even if summer is holding on. And you know what, Doug? One thing that we are fairly confident in is the nation will see that slower slide into fall when we look at the temperature trend.
Yeah, I mean, what we're seeing from the eastern prairies to Quebec and even into the Maritimes is summer's grand finale, or second summer, this extended period of warm and mostly dry weather. And you know, we know it's going to end, but this transition to consistently colder weather happening more slowly for much of the country than what we typically see.
So as we look at the national temperature pattern, besides BC and the Yukon, we do see this above seasonal trend. What's driving that?
Well, the dominant global pattern driver is this developing weak La Nina. That's cooler than normal ocean water temperatures in the tropical Pacific. You think, how can that impact our weather? Well, that dictates the jet stream pattern across the northern hemisphere, which has a big role in our seasonal weather. And also, the continent is surrounded by warmer than normal ocean water temperatures. The Pacific, the Atlantic, the Gulf of Mexico, that's also a big key to the forecast.
Now, just a reminder, warm changes. Your perspective of warm changes, right? November above seasonal in a place like Saskatoon could actually be just 2 or 3 degrees because 0 is normal. In Ottawa, 5 is normal. Halifax, Toronto, 7's a normal temperature for November. So do keep that in mind when you think warm fall. We're not going 20 degrees right through the season.
Right. I mean, a day that would make you shiver and complain in September could be a delightful day in November.
Absolutely. So Doug, that's really the question. When do we expect that colder pattern to actually lock in?
To be honest, we don't know exactly.
I like the honesty.
Yeah, I mean, we do think it'll be delayed, but when we look back at history with developing weak La Ninas, what we see is that some of those years you stay mild and then there's a plunge and November feels more like early winter. Other years that pattern persists and that mild pattern dominates November and then the plunge towards the end of the month. The key is whether the coolest water is more in the eastern Pacific or the central Pacific. We're going to be watching that very closely over the next few weeks. That will be the key to November. November is indeed a wild card. We're more confident in how this pattern develops through October.
Yeah.
And then it's like, how does this end and how quickly?
And speaking of how quickly, some places in Canada have already been tracking snow. For example, a place like North Bay already tracked its first snowfall of the season, and that was the second earliest snowfall they have ever seen. So when we look at snowfall, the earliest 2 centimeters, you know, for a place like Timmins and Kenora, they usually see it in September along that 401 corridor, more like October. But then we look at Western Canada, Calgary, August, September snow, that can be fairly common.
Absolutely. I mean, it is normal for the fall to include some winter weather. And, you know, when we're doing the fall forecast, we really try to stay away from forecasting when that first snowfall will be, because that could be a total anomaly from the rest of the season. You don't need a cold month to get a snowstorm. You need a cold day. And so you can have a very warm month, have a sharp cold front, get a snowstorm, and warm right back up. So, you know, in places like North Bay, we've got summer weather, but we've already seen our first snowfall.
Yeah, exactly.
That's fall in Canada.
Absolutely, the changeable times of the season. And now, Doug, let's talk about the storms, because fall is the season known for big, ferocious fall storms, but we're thinking those could be fewer this season.
Yeah, I want to highlight fewer because we could still have some potent storms, but these classic fall storms thrive on the clash of air masses when you're battling the cold air and the warm air. But when the country is dominated by above seasonal temperatures, you don't have those clashes and the battles. So we'll have fewer storms. However, it is fall. By the end of fall, it will be winter, which means there will be cold air pushing at times. It's not like we're never going to have cold fronts. So when those cold fronts do come through, they will often have warmer, more humid air to work with. So fewer storms doesn't mean you can't have a high impact storm.
Absolutely. And when you have that warmer air, that moist air, that could mean the totals in terms of rain or snow could be of more impact. We'll talk about that in a second. But first, Doug, let's focus on BC. BC and up towards the Yukon, we are not expecting to see less storms through this region. We actually could see maybe an above average season in terms of rainfall. Portions of British Columbia usually see 300 to 400 millimeters of rain throughout the fall. So what's giving you confidence in this?
Well, we expect a near normal number of storms, but the primary jet stream pattern seems to favor a dip in the jet stream off the coast. That creates a favorable environment for systems to come into the BC coast. But the ocean water temperatures are warmer than normal, so these storms could be more moisture laden than normal. So it doesn't mean you'll have more rainy days or more storms, but when it rains, it pours. And so we already know it's a wet season. We're not just saying it'll be a typically wet season. There is the risk that we get some excessive rainfall events and tip those final numbers above normal. The good side of that is if temperatures can stay down, some of that will be alpine snow.
And I was just going to say that. This could be great news for early start to ski season, right?
Right. It's too early to know just how early it would be, but the signs look a lot more encouraging than they did this time last year.
At least sustainable snow in the start. So, hey, that's great news. Now, Doug, let's talk about, you mentioned these storms could be high impact. You get a cold front that comes in, you get enough of that clash. Where could we be looking at these high impact storms in Canada?
Well, really anywhere we could see that. Again, we think much of the central and eastern part of the country will have fewer storms, but with a developing La Nina, we're going to have a more wavy jet stream pattern. So these storms will be moving more slowly than you would see with El Nino, where they tend to whip across the country. So when you do get a storm, you can get a lot of precipitation. It could be more of a long duration event. Different from many falls where it seems like you have a parade of storms going through every few days.
Gotcha. Now let's talk about hurricane season, because that has been very interesting. We have seen some extremely memorable moments, of course, with Beryl and all the moisture it brought into eastern Canada. Huge flooding stories through here. Then we saw the season become very quiet. Now we're getting through that midway point. What are you thinking, Doug?
Yeah, I don't want to forget Debbie and the flooding that it caused in southern Quebec as
Yeah.
well. And then that lull going into the peak of the season. But we do think that the second half will become more active than normal once again. We just passed the halfway point. There's still a lot of season left to go, much too early to let our guard down. And the pattern, unfortunately, still does appear favorable for a system or two to impact eastern Canada, especially Atlantic Canada. And ocean water temperatures running very warm, so storms can maintain their intensity as they head north, and they can also be more moisture laden. So definitely watching closely the second half of the season.
Okay, and of course that can really change some of your rainfall totals when it comes to Atlantic Canada and even pushing into Quebec. And remember, as we go through the fall season, the Weather Network is your best source for your forecast.